Okay, folks, to wrap it up, let's go into a deep dive of how the neurotransmitters in the brain are being affected by taking Adderall. So on the screen here, folks, is just like a normal example of what you might expect with a nerve cell, a neuron, and neurotransmitters. So I apologize. I think you already understand that I am certainly not much of an artist. These green dots are neurotransmitters. And here, this is the very end of the nerve cell. So in normal circumstances, what happens? Normally, a nerve cell will kind of release all this neurotransmitter outside of it. And then after some time, that neurotransmitter gets kind of sucked back in through these channels here. And these are protein channels. So these kind of dashed lines right here, this is indicating a protein that kind of acts as a channel, allowing the neurotransmitter back into the cell. Now, what happens if we add Adderall to the scene? So recall that Adderall or amphetamines look a lot like neurotransmitters. So in this case, we have this kind of release of neurotransmitters like there would normally be. However, now that this person has taken Adderall, there's a lot of Adderall as well outside of the cell. Now, when that Adderall is being sucked back in through these protein channels, less of the neurotransmitter is going to be sucked back in because some of what's being sucked back in is going to be instead Adderall, right? Let's say in this previous slide, this cell is able to suck back in like 10 molecules of neurotransmitter, for example. Well, now if there's a bunch of Adderall in this space, maybe only 5 molecules of neurotransmitter are sucked in and 5 molecules of Adderall. What that results in is more neurotransmitter being left outside of the cell. And let's just do a quick side-by-side to better be able to visualize this. So we're seeing before Adderall and after Adderall that Adderall is increasing the amount of neurotransmitter outside of the cell at the area that we call the synapse. And so the synapse is the area kind of connecting the neuron. Let me actually rewrite this to make it a bit more clear. It's the area between one neuron and the next. So this is what is happening with Adderall. As a reminder, how this is working, folks, is that amphetamines, so amphetamines I've kind of boxed out here, look just like neurotransmitters that I've placed these ovals around. Let's talk a little bit more about the protein channel that does this. So the specific protein that recognizes Adderall or amphetamines is called a monoamine reuptake transporter. So it is these kind of channels that I've drawn here in the cell that lets the neurotransmitters in and Adderall in. How does this protein work? So this protein works by pumping molecules back into the cell or out of the cell. And it does a type of pumping that we call active transport. It uses active transport to kind of pump the amphetamine in. And when that amphetamine is pumped in, what's happening is the amount of neurotransmitter in the cell appears to be high. But really, it's not high, because what the cell is doing is it's mistaking the Adderall as neurotransmitter. So the cell is like, oh, I have enough neurotransmitter in me, I don't need to pump in anymore. So what happens is something called reverse transport. And that reverse transport allows kind of the external amount of neurotransmitter to remain high after someone takes Adderall. And this is all because Adderall looks like a neurotransmitter. And so that's why we're seeing kind of the positive effects of a drug like Adderall in people with ADHD. But there are side effects of a drug like Adderall, because nerve cells don't just appear in our brain. They actually appear throughout our body, right? And so for folks who take Adderall, or in particular if folks are taking stimulants in a more recreational way, then you might see side effects in areas of the nervous system that are kind of more peripheral. So for example, there are clearly cardiovascular side effects. If you take a stimulant, it's going to kind of speed up your heart rate, and you might get, like a fluttering chest feeling, or kind of a feeling that it's becoming more challenging to breathe because your heart is pumping so much. And this is due to a release in adrenaline. So remember that kind of fight or flight response that can be caused by some of the neurotransmitters that we discussed, in particular norepinephrine. You'll have that same effect by taking something like a stimulant. You'll get that kind of fight or flight feeling, kind of for no reason, but just because you've been taking the stimulant. That wraps up for us the science behind how Adderall works and other amphetamine-based stimulants. They work because they look like neurotransmitters, and they kind of trick our brain into thinking there's more neurotransmitter than there is. Adderall increases the concentration of dopamine and norepinephrine from one nerve cell to the next in that synapse, and they work on a protein called monoamine reuptake transporters. I'll leave you with this cat meme. See you in class.